Children's television weren't always dirty words. The golden age of children's television stretches from the 1940s to the 1970s, but I contend that a shard of that wonder persisted through the ultra-commercial 1980s, if you know where to look for it. So, what went right? Alright, you got me. This episode isn't about a TV show, but the special did air on TV in December 1984 and was never released in theaters, so I'm counting it as children's television. It only aired once, and my family had a shiny new VCR, meaning that I ended up watching it all throughout my childhood. So 30 years later, let's take a look at one of my favorite holiday specials, and one I'm sure you probably haven't heard of. Lights, the Miracle of Hanukkah.
And for once, just don't get your feet wet. Okay, Ernie? Please?
Back then, before it all happened, there wasn't any festival of lights yet, and life went on in Jerusalem more or less the way it always had.
Okay, Miriam.
You could say that the story really started the day the lights first came down to earth. It was far away at a mountain called Sinai.
Lights was produced by Gesher Jerusalem Productions, features the voice talents of Leonard Nimoy and Paul Mecker-Glasser, and is narrated by Judd Hirsch. It tells the story of the history of Hanukkah with an emphasis on theme rather than hard facts on the Maccabees in Jewish history. This is clearly a production tailored for young children, and that's perfectly fine. The core plot centers around a small cast of characters: the children Miriam and Yanni, an old shepherd, a scholar, a young man, and the children's mother, father, and baby sibling. We see Alexander the Great's conquering of Jerusalem and the growing conflict between the Greeks and the Jews, culminating in the Maccabee Rebellion, the sacking of the Great Temple, and the Miracle of Hanukkah. At a runtime of 23 minutes, it's not a very complicated film, but its simplicity is what makes it so good and so unique, especially in contemporary times when most people know so little about other religions and aren't that eager to find out.
Then one day, ships came over the sea. Alexander the Great and the armies of Greece set out to unite the whole world. They found the Persians first.
We begin our story in ancient Jerusalem, around the time Alexander the Great was building his empire. In a fairly bleak scene, his army conquers the Persians and then heads towards Jerusalem. The head rabbi greets them, and Alexander, fascinated by their lights, decides not to sack the city but instead to peacefully occupy it. Not the best solution, but still a very good one for the ancient world. According to the historian Josephus, this actually happened, and Alexander treated both the temple and the faith of the Jews with great reverence. A few years later, Alexander the Great is moved on, and the Greek rulers of Jerusalem want to try and get the people to use their language, be like them, and get rid of their lights. Two Greek nobles focus their peer pressure on a young Jewish man, outfitting him in their style and bringing him to a fancy party. All the while, a light sticks by him, even though he tries to get rid of it to fit in with his new Greek friends. Later, the two Greeks discuss the Jews and their concerns.
Don't get me wrong now. I'm as open-minded as the next guy. No one's ever accused me of prejudice. But there's something funny about those people. Hi, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Have a real nice evening now.
Not that I've got anything personal against these people. You understand?
On the contrary, some of them are real nice guys. It's just that those lights of theirs
Make them different from everybody else. Kind of sets up a barrier between people.
sounds a little dangerous. What if it spreads? They'd be better off without those lights, wouldn't they?
Much better, and as soon as possible, too.
For some reason, that scene is extremely affecting now, even though it was written over 30 years ago. The two Greeks convince the young man to help them in their campaign to convince the Jews to give up their lights and embrace the Greek language and ideals instead. Eventually, this campaign turns violent, and when in the temple, faced with destroying the last light, the young man has a change of heart and flees. If I had to nitpick anything about this film, it's that the chase scene is a bit silly, but it comes to a dark end, with Miriam and Yanni being threatened by the Greeks.
Now, why don't you kids just give me that one little light you got there, and you can have all these shiny ones instead. What do you say?
When the new rulers of Jerusalem saw that they couldn't persuade the people to give up the lights, they decided to get rid of the people instead.
All right. If that's the way you want it.
Taking to the hills, the famous Maccabee rebellion begins, and with the entire community working and fighting together, the Greeks are beaten back and defeated. In all fairness, the film does gloss over the actual war, which lasted longer than a single battle, but did feature the Jews using guerrilla tactics to fend off the more traditional Greeks. However, after the army retreats, the city is in ruins, and the great temple stands dark. Remembering the light the young man hid in a jar, the entire city searches until it can be found, and used to bring the lights back to Jerusalem.
When they returned to the city, the people found the menorah cold and empty, with no lights to fill it.
This is, of course, a simplified version behind the origin of Hanukkah. After the Jews retook the city, they found it completely sacked and all the sacred lamp oil spilled out on the temple floor. It would take days to make more lamp oil, but they found a small jar with just enough for one night. Miraculously, this tiny bit of oil lasted for 8 nights, long enough for more to be made so the fire would not go out. The interesting thing about Lights, the Miracle of Hanukkah, is that it contains powerful metaphors in its storytelling, to the point that I only really got it when I rewatched the film to write this episode. This is a film about religion, in which religion is never actually mentioned. God isn't mentioned once, and the titular lights are a representation for everything about the Jewish faith. The lights come down from Mount Sinai with instructions on how to live in a community and guidelines for all aspects of life. That the lights are also symbolic for the Hebrew language is evident throughout the film, as the Greeks are very forceful about the Jews learning their language instead. Whereas the lights are ephemeral but possess physical properties, the Greek symbols are shown as cold and heavy, likely metallic, and lacking the spiritual quality of the lights. When the Greeks first arrive, however, the film demonstrates that there is a real possibility for the two to exist in harmony. Never at any point in the film is the Jewish faith referred to as such. The Greeks don't tell the people of Jerusalem that they must give up their faith and worship the Greek pantheon. Rather, it's all about the lights. What a perfect way to encapsulate complex concepts for a child's understanding. There's this thing they have, these lights, and they're very important to the people, but those guys want them to give up the lights and then go to war when the people won't. The people were right to resist, and that's why they won. In these modern times, merely wanting children to learn about other religions is often howled down as indoctrination or political correctness gone mad, but I grew up in a slightly different time. That a religious story can manage to be so powerful without once mentioning religion is amazing. Lights, The Miracle of Hanukkah is a simple production but shines in its adaptation, voice work, and musical score, which is also simple but far from repetitive. The film ends with Miriam and Yanni, the old shepherd, the scholar, the young man, and the children's mother, father, and baby sibling in modern-day Jerusalem. They are living their lives with the lights just as they did in ancient times. Their faith, language, and writing have survived the millennia. As an adult, I definitely recommend you check out Lights, The Miracle of Hanukkah. It's available on DVD through Amazon, but the film has also been posted in its entirety on YouTube. There are many holiday specials out there, and many Hanukkah specials, but for this one, they did it right.
This episode contained footage owned by Gesher Jerusalem Productions, and our use is not meant to challenge that ownership or copyright. We provide it solely on an informational basis. If you would like to purchase this film, it's available on DVD through Amazon.